Hey, guys, it's Nick, the real story of TulipMania right now. A huge bubble, a country gone mad over tulips, an economy destroyed. Or at least that's what we're always told, right? TulipMania is often cited as kind of the first speculative bubble, but is it the real story? You know, when I first started researching this topic, I thought it would be easy, for a speculative bubble, just read a few books on it, get a handle of kind of what's going on. And what I found was not what I expected. It's the exact opposite almost of what we're told. Yes, there is a tulip bubble and people do buy and sell a lot for tulips, but it's not the whole story. It's not what really happened. Let me give you an example. A lot of our modern imagery for TulipMania comes from Charles Mackay's Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. Goldgar, a historian who's done a lot of research on this subject, has said we really need to take Charles Mackay's book with a lot of salt. Goldgar says, Mackay's chief source was Johann Beckmann, author of A History of Inventions. Beckmann was concerned about financial speculation in his own day, and Beckmann's own sources were suspect. He, meaning Beckmann, relied chiefly on Abraham Munting, a botanical writer from the late 17th century. Munting's father had lost money on tulips, and Munting was not a reliable eyewitness. His own words, often verbatim, come chiefly from two places, meaning he basically plagiarized. The historical account of chronicler Lieuwe Van Aitzema in 1669, and one of the longest contemporary pieces against the trade, translated as Dialogue Between True Mouth and Greedy Goods of 1637. As Aitzema himself was basing his chronicle on pamphlet literature, we are left with a picture of TulipMania based almost solely on propaganda, cited as if it were fact. Alright, so what does all that mean, right? Well, imagine that something as big as, say, like the 2000 tech stock bubble happened like 400 years ago, right? And the only sources to survive were like a few blogs, basically, and maybe your newspaper's local opinion piece, right? These are hardly kind of the historical accounts you would hope to find about something. And then imagine that over the centuries, people have used those and cited them as fact and kind of building on it as it goes along. And then 400 years later, you're left with something that doesn't look like anything it looked like. That's basically what's happened with TulipMania, is what she's saying. All that is why we need to take a fresh look at TulipMania. And in order to understand why TulipMania became TulipMania, you have to understand kind of the time period, right? You have to place it in its historical context. I want you to imagine that Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and all these people launching rockets into space, right? Imagine that they come out tomorrow and they say, we are going to create an interstellar spaceship. It's going to fly to a distant sun where there are planets, and they're going to go and see what they can find. And so a few years later, they blast this rocket off into space. It disappears for a while, right? They're traveling faster than light. Hopefully we've invented that. They go off to this distant star. We don't hear anything from them. And then suddenly they come back, right? Not only do they come back, but they come back bringing all sorts of just cool and interesting stuff, right? Alien flowers, alien plants, alien animals that they've stuffed. You imagine how many of us would just be glued to our TV screens just watching, being like, what is that? What does that do? Oh my God. I wonder, like that sense of just like this discovery of, looking at things and seeing new things that we've never seen before, right? And when you think about that scenario, you get an idea for what the feeling must have been like for Europe during that time. Because this is a time when Europe is starting to get stuff from the East Indies, from North America, from South America. I mean, even the potato gets introduced. Like the potato, the boringest thing you can think of, is coming over at this point in time. The thing that we were just like, oh yeah, it's potato. It's new. And one of the things that comes back is the tulip. Now, traditionally, credit goes to this guy, Ogar de Besquick, or something like that. He's an ambassador from the Holy Roman Empire to the Ottomans. Historians have kind of gone through and kind of pointed out the fact there's a number of problems with him introducing it. One is when he gets out there, he would have had to send a tulip bulb or offshoot back like right away, which is possible, but it's not very likely. Additionally, he misremembers a few details. One of the biggest nails in the coffin is he's writing this like a while later, and tulips already kind of gained popularity in Europe at this time, so you kind of wonder like if that human emotion displayed in. He's like, yes, I introduced the tulip to Europe. Me. All me, baby. You know, so you wonder if that played into it at all. So historians kind of doubt that he's actually the one who introduced the tulip to Europe. They think it probably just came over in trade at some time before that. My favorite story is the story of this Flemish merchant who gets a shipment of cloth from the Ottoman Empire. And supposedly there's this bag of tulips there for no reason at all. It's just like there. And of course he has no idea what a tulip is. So he just like takes it home and thinks it's some onion and like grills it up and eats it basically. And there's some conflict in the stories, but either he loves it or he just hates it. Either way, this guy Joris Rye comes in the picture. And the only reason he's important is because he gets us the careless Clusius. Because he introduces careless Clusius to the tulip, supposedly. Probably not. But, you know, it's history. It's how these things go. Careless Clusius, you got to mention in the story, because he's basically responsible for taking the tulip and like spreading it all over Europe. He's what we'd call a botanist today. And he lives a very privileged life. You know, he's able to basically travel around Europe, look at flowers and stuff like that. He doesn't really have a house of his own, so he ends up sending all his like things that he finds to his friends. He maintains a lot of contacts all over Europe. One of the stories you just have to mention about careless Clusius. He's a Protestant, and he's in the employ of the Holy Roman Emperor, who's Catholic. The Holy Roman Emperor is kind of cool with Protestants at this point in time. The fact that he's just not actively killing Protestants is a pretty big deal. You have to remember, this is a point when Protestants and Catholics are still killing each other over pretty minor differences in the Christian faith, what we would consider pretty minor differences. So he's in the employ of the Holy Roman Emperor. Clusius actually has a private garden. There's only a few of these tulips in Europe. He goes out to his garden one morning and a ton of his tulips are just gone. They're stolen. It's funny because flower thefts are actually kind of a big thing. You know, if you're a noble and you want a flower, then, you know, what's the easiest way? Then let's go steal them from the Protestant over there, right? And at one point, he's supposedly forced to endure being at this noblewoman's house and seeing his own flowers in her garden. You just have to think he was like, so, where'd you get those flowers, huh? Where'd you get those? She's like, oh, yes, I got them from my friend, blah, 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 blah. And he's just like, really? 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 You didn't steal those from my garden, perchance? Only maybe a few of those in Europe now, and you didn't get them from me? No? Okay. Yeah, it's fine. You know, so hashtag like rich people problems, right? So, and then of course the emperor dies only like 2 years after taking the job. The new emperor takes over and he's not really friendly with Protestants, and he's not a flower lover. So kicks Clusius out and the whole garden's destroyed. So he takes some odd jobs here and there. But in the 1590s, Clusius gets a letter from the Dutch Republic, the University of Leiden, and they say, we want you to come here and teach botanical stuff at our university. And Clusius takes the job, which brings us to the main setting of our story, the United Provinces, or the Dutch Republic. At this point in our story, it's helpful to ask why tulips, right? Why did tulips suddenly become popular and not something else? Why not stuffed birds? Why not shells, which were coming over in this period and were getting pretty big, right? Well, in order to understand why tulips and not something else, the first thing we need to talk about is tulip reproduction. All right, so tulip reproduction basically happens in one of two ways, right? There's seeds and then there's offshoots, right? The first method is seeds. You know seeds, right? Seeds, they're seeds. If you deal with a plant, you've seen seeds. They take about 6 to 9 years in order to flower, which at this point in history, you only live into about 40 on average, and you could easily get taken out before then by plague or by, you know, your city getting sacked or just your appendix burst, any number of things. So they're not really the preferable method. In addition to the length of time you have to wait, there's also the factor that it's not really going to look like the tulip you got it from. There's going to be a lot of differences. The preferable method is actually called offshoots. Now you have the mother bulb, which is in the ground, and then that flower shoots out from there, right? And when it's in the ground, it'll develop these little like almost growths on the bottom of it. And these are called offshoots. When you lift the bulb during the summer, you can actually just take this offshoot off, and it's only going to take about 2 to 3 years for it to actually flower. And then once it actually does flower, it's going to look pretty close to the original flower you got from. It's basically a clone, although there's some issues with this that you'll see later. The mother bulb can produce about 2 to 3 of these every year for a few years before it ends up dying. So this is the preferable method. Now, why is all this tulip reproduction stuff important, right? You know, the first thing to keep in mind is that the supply does increase every year, right? This is not like an exotic stuffed bird that's suddenly you're not going to have 2 exotic stuffed birds, right? The other thing to keep in mind is that the supply increases very slowly. So even if that demand increases, supply isn't necessarily going to increase that much. What does that mean? Rising prices. The other thing to keep in mind is that rare equals desirable at this point in time. And nowadays, this part of the world is synonymous with tulips, right? But it wasn't like that. The Dutch Republic, you know, is just getting introduced to these flowers, which are new and exotic and, you know, newcomers from the Middle East, basically. The other cool aspect that really, I think, puts the flower head and shoulders over its competition is its ability to spontaneously change. And so, for example, one year you might have a tulip like this. It's nice, it's yellow, it's beautiful. And then over the course of the summer, it, you know, goes in the ground, it goes into remission basically, or dormant for the year. And then next year it comes back up and suddenly it's different. It's not yellow anymore. It's yellow with red. You know, and this ability that, you know, it just would change. And it'd be the same tulip, but suddenly it was different. There was nothing seemingly, you didn't do anything necessarily to the flower. And nobody at the age could tell anybody why it happened. Nobody had any idea. You know, this was an age when questions about viruses and bacteria, they weren't even guessed at. There are stories of people trying to get these multicolored tulips by pouring red wine over the flower beds. Or they would light their garden on fire with pigeon dung because they thought that would do it. You know, it's kind of like the lotto every year, you know, like, is it going to change this year? Is it not? You know, adds a sense of suspense. And so you get this ability of the flower just to change spontaneously, and that's probably one of the biggest reasons why the tulip starts coming head and shoulders over the rest. Another reason we'd be remiss not to mention is the social aspects. You know, you have to remember at this point in time in the Dutch Republic, this is the original land of opportunity in a lot of senses, right? This is where the Pilgrims went before the Pilgrims became the Pilgrims. If you're American, you know who I'm talking about, right? The Pilgrims and Plymouth Colony, all that stuff, the hats, everything, right? Like, but when they left England, they didn't go directly to America. They went to the Dutch Republic first. And then they realized their kids were kind of becoming Dutch, and they're like, hey, we want you to be English and not Dutch. We want to be English, just not in England. So let's go to America. Additionally, people could work their way up through the ranks, right? You could start off as a peasant and work your way and become wealthier and wealthier and become whoever you want to be, you know, whereas the rest of Europe is you're born a peasant, you're staying a peasant, right? This is different in the Dutch Republic. But then you run into a problem of how do you distinguish yourself from other people? How do you show status in the society? And one of the things that starts coming into vogue is collecting. You know, this is because of the Renaissance and all this cool stuff coming over from the East Indies. And flowers or tulips are kind of one of the things that are in the sphere of things that people collect. So when Clusius arrives in the 1590s, there isn't necessarily a market yet for tulips. It's developing, it's there, but it's not like a market as we think of today. Basically, it's a group of tight-knit people who are really interested in flowers. You know, they trade them back and forth. This is viewed as a gentlemanly activity. You know, you give gifts to other people. It's kind of a social activity. You know, they go to their houses, they talk about flowers, but, you know, it's really about hanging out. But I want you to imagine that you're one of these merchants who's come up through the ranks and you're starting to earn a lot of money and you want to show off your status, right? You want to show off the fact that you've earned a lot of money and, you know, you're getting near the top. And in order to kind of show off that status, show off that collection, one of the things you want to do is acquire a tulip garden. But for reasons we've already discussed, the supply is kind of limited, right? It's hard to get your hands on these tulips. Well, how do you go about getting some if the supply is so limited and, you know, the group's kind of pretty tight-knit? Well, what we'll see is that these people end up resorting to some very ungentlemanly methods next week. It's really the journey and not the destination for me. The training wheels aren't on, right? And the futures market imploding spectacularly. Modern banking is basically created. We see so many things that are vital to our economy today that are invented during this period. If you aren't subscribed, then subscribe now and you'll get notified. Otherwise, if it's already next week and you're already seeing this video now, then go ahead and click the video over here and I'll catch you next week.